Good evening, everybody. Beautiful night. We're very close to the shortest day, December the 22nd this year. And Rat, my terrible terrier, is with me. He loves coming out in the evening, and he's just scooched off. We're right next to a very large avenue of oak trees here at the farm. And it's a kind of time of the year where we have big celebrations here at the farm with the wildlife. And of course the Druids, they'll be meeting here on December the 22nd to celebrate the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, and there'll be quite a number of them here. But there's some other celebrations happening, and I'm just walking down this avenue of oaks, and here comes the first one, and I've got a torch with me. Normally I'll have Matthew Gudgeon with me, and sometimes Rat. They're quite different. They're both good company, but Rat takes a very intense interest in fox poo, and Matthew's rather indifferent about that. Rat loves the wind and the rain, anything to come out and a walk, and, well, Matthew's a little bit indifferent about that as well. But never mind, they're both very good company, and Matthew will be here later on, and we'll be looking at some of the other delights on the farm. Anyway, the first oak tree I've come to tells the story straight away, and I can see what I need to see. Before that, I'm just going to shine the torch down beside this avenue of oaks, and the air is unbelievable. It is absolutely full of flying moths. It's full of them. I can see 300-400 of them. It looks like almost a snowstorm is the best way to describe it. And they're sort of heading into the trees, onto the trunks. So, first oak tree, it's perfect for me. There, perched about a metre up, is a male winter moth with his wings. They're shut at the moment. Another one a little bit. I'll just move around this side of the tree. There we are. The torch is fully on. There, on the moth. And the wingspan is about just short of 3 centimetres, about 28 millimetres. And there's a slightest breeze, and it's just blowing the wings to one side and then the other. And so, why is that interesting? Because if I'd have brought you here on a sort of early summer's evening, about late May, early June, and we'd walked along here, we'd suddenly have cobwebs all over our face, and lowering themselves down from the oak canopy above us would be the caterpillars from these moths that we're looking at this evening. And they land on the ground as green caterpillars. We call them loopers or geomuds because they look as though they're just measuring out the length. They're sort of ground measurers, if you like, the way they loop along. And bright green caterpillars, and they dig a little hole in the ground anywhere there's grass. They can't obviously do it on roads if they land on the highway, but they then pupate and form a little chrysalis in the soil and stay there until the coldest part of the year, which is now. Quite unbelievable why they do this. So they choose this season, around about the shortest day, to actually mate. And the ones that we're seeing, the ones that I'm seeing this evening, flying about, they're all males. And the females and the males emerge together on the ground, but the females can't fly. You just can't make this up. They've got what we call vestigial wings, tiny little stumps. So in fact, they look rather like sort of 6-legged spiders crawling up the oak trees. And the male's job is to come and mate with them as they ascend the oak trees. And they've got a big mission in their heads to get to high up in the oak trees to lay their eggs later on this evening. And after that, that's it. They die. So really, a lot of them only have one day as adult moths to live, and the females look rather an apology. So I'd kind of like to give the males a bit of a boy-to-boy tip about how to find the girls, because they've just come out of the ground, a lot of them, and they're in the bottom foot or two of the oak trees. And I'm just walking along, just looking for one or two of the females. The side of this oak tree, wow! I'm just looking down, probably 30 or 40 moths plastered on the side of an oak here. It's not a very large oak, it's about 18 inches diameter, no branches on till about 20 feet. And the whole side of it just out of the way of this slightest breeze that's blowing tonight. They're all just waiting. So I'd like to say them, boys, if you want to get lucky, the girls are on their way up the trunk. But I've had a word with a local moth expert, and sort of said, why aren't the male moths sort of flying right down low, whereas most of them are 8 or 10 feet up the trunk? And he said, he kind of looked at me in a quizzical way and said, females have got it quite right. He said they suffer most of their predation when they're low, near the ground, all the things that are likely to eat them close to ground level, even in the dark, so they're very vulnerable. And it's not until they get about 1 metre up the tree trunk that they do their magic. They don't need wings because they've got a secret weapon, which is called a pheromone. And once they're up the trunk about 1 metre, they let rip with this perfume. And that drives the boys mad, which is why they're all waiting here. And many of them then take to the wing once they scent this pheromone, and they can pick it up from quite a distance. So I'm going to turn round. There's a meadow behind me, 2 horses here. You heard Rat barking at them as we got in to this area. And all over the meadow there's moths flying, but particularly close to these oak trees. There's a sycamore tree there, that's got 2 or 3 on. There's Rat in the distance. He's there as well. Young beech tree there. Now, this is the secret, how to find the girls. So, hands and knees job, and it's still quite early in the evening, bearing in mind they've got to get right up to the top of these trees that we're climbing on. They're not easy to... Here we are. Here's one right in front of me. I got to really search to see them. It's it's not what you call a good looker. It really does look like a tiny spider, and there's a male quite close to it, but there's no kind of action happening at the moment, if you forgive the description. Oh, the male's flattened his wings completely against the trunk now. Very, very beautiful. Sort of a greyish, buffish grey, almost a hint of gold on the upper side of the wings, and that is close to 3 centimetres wingspan. And right next to him, almost looks like a woodlouse to start with, is a female winter moth. That's their proper name. And she's just slowly climbing up the tree. To be honest, she looks like a woodlouse, one of those what we used to call piggy wiggies at school. She's kind of greyish, same colour body, but these 2 little stumps, they look like almost rolled up leaves, just sticking out of her body. And they're the vestigial wings. She doesn't need wings, and I'll explain why. She's going to climb up this tree. It will take her. I'll stand back from the oak. The boys are all waiting on the side of the trunk. She'll go all the way up there. I'm just walking backwards, right up into the canopy, and way up there, there's all the little buds which will burst out into leaf. March, April, May, and she will have laid her eggs right up there to 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. It'll take her all that time. Once she's jettisoned the eggs, and each of the females will lay between 100, 150 eggs up in the canopy, and each square metre of canopy, there can be 4 or 5 females make it up there. So it's a kind of mass migration, and they lay all these numbers of eggs, because if you're ever up and about early in the morning and you see great tits, blue tits, long-tailed tits, all sort of searching aimlessly about in oak woodlands in the canopy up there, what they're looking for are 2 things. First one is to feast up on the females. They don't make it back down to ground. That's the end of their life. They can either be eaten, or they just drop off back down onto the ground. It doesn't matter, because they've passed on to the next generation their species, if you like. So their life's work is done. Very short life. And what then happens is those eggs, the ones that don't get eaten, there are thousands of these tiny eggs laid tightly in the little packed oak twig buds. They're searched out by lots and lots of the tit species, great tits, blue tits, long-tailed tits, all feast on those eggs. But because there are so many, male moth almost landed on me then. No pheromones on me. So they're absolutely amazing. So those eggs will they hatch out sort of timed with the emergence of the oak leaves, and they're really hungry, defoliating caterpillars. But something else then happens. Blue tits, great tits, coal tits, all the tit species and many other bird species time their egg laying with the hatching of the winter moth caterpillars. It's an amazing story. It all works kind of hand in glove. That's why nature is so interesting. There's not just one part of it. Everything in one way or another is linked together. It's a sort of continuous chain. Just walk to the next oak tree and it's exactly the same. Just on the downwind side, the whole side of the tree trunk is plastered with these male moths, all waiting to get lucky tonight. So the blue tits, great tits all do this, the massive egg laying. It's kind of all their eggs in one basket, if you like. 6, 8, 10 eggs in a nest, and their main food is, yes, you've guessed it, the winter moth caterpillars, those juicy green caterpillars that contain all the water and the nutrition. That's the absolute perfect food for their youngsters. Any that aren't eaten, oh, look at this tree. I just walked up to... Sorry, I get a little bit carried away. But this is 25 feet to the first branch. This is a whopping oak tree. And again, just slightly on the east side, there's a very gentle westerly breeze. You'd hardly know it. The moon in the background, and the side of the oak trunk is plastered with buoys. Yep. It's just an amazing sight, absolutely beautiful. So there we are, and the same fate happens to the boys. Once they've mated, they've completed their life cycle as well, so they kind of provide fodder for any hungry birds that are out and about in the morning. So many of those only often live one day as well, sometimes a bit more if they're lucky and they can stay overnight. And this one's got 2 or 3 girls. Here's another girl here with her little stumpy wings. She's about 1 metre up, and a male again right beside her, but there's no activity yet. But if I stayed here, it's a little bit chilly now. If I stayed here a bit longer, then there'd sort of be X-rated, I'm sorry. So we'll just leave it there and let them get on with their interesting and fascinating life story. And of course the blue tits and great tits, which frequent High Ash Farm, are going to be well provended March, April, May time in 2024. Beautiful. And look at the moon just shining through the oaks. I think it's a full moon the day after Boxing Day, 27th of December, and that will light up there and light the farm up at night. A lovely time. Oh, Rat's found something. Oh dear, he's barking away in the background. What have you found? I did say he's good company. At least I know where he is. What have you got? What are you doing? Oh, there's a horse in its meadow. Matthew and Rat do have a similarity. I think neither of them actually like horses, if I'm honest about it. And Rat doesn't think the horse should be in its own field. So that was what all that was. What are you doing, you terrible dog? Right, it's supper time for me. So back to the farm, knock something up quickly, and just take a final look at that moon and another oak tree in front of me, plastered with winter moths. Enjoy winter. Morning, everybody. It's just about the shortest day, and the wind's blowing a hoolie here at Hyash Farm this morning. Just going to open the big old roller shutter doors into the farm workshop to start off another day at the farm. Already lots of ladies down the farmyard attending their horses, some of them grooming before they pop them out. People's relationship with animals is very important, and I always start the day off. I'm just going to share this rather intimate moment with you, with some of the birds that spend the night here at the farm in the workshop. And I'm just squeezing down between a trailer and a water bowser because it's just getting light. And this is one of my favourite sounds. Always makes me smile. I just say good morning to my two bantams. Yeah, farmers have a huge and intimate relationship with all the animals they keep. These bantams lay some eggs for me. And whether you're a farmer with livestock and you just lean on the gate and watching your cattle grazing, or the dairy herd waiting to come in to be milked, or if you keep horses, grooming them, if you've got a pet cat or a dog. And my little highlight of every morning is to come and let the bantams out. They're free to go out now, outside, and they forage for worms and sort of dig around the edge of the buildings. And they always greet me with this, well, it's a bantam's dawn chorus. Just listen to this. Are you all right, you girls? And it's good news for you two. I'm having a vegetarian Christmas, so not that I'd cook you. I don't think I'd really enjoy that after the sort of intimate relation we have here. So they're ready to fly down. Opened the doors so the light's increased a bit in the buildings, but they've spent another safe night here. They perch on the back of the old water bowser here, and they're now about to fly down. They both have a sing-song. They're wine spot bantams, beautiful. Oh, the old girl, who's about 8 years old now, she just started to chime in as well. Normally it's a silver spot there, which is she's now going to jump off and fly off and spend the day. Worms for breakfast, worms for lunch, and worms if they're lucky, and maybe the odd beetle for dinner tonight before they go back to roost in the same place. Just listen, she's now going to fly down. both out of bed, ready for another day on the farm. That's my little treat to start off on a gruelling day's work here at High Ash Farm. Matthew's coming round in a short while, and we'll be looking at some of the mistletoe here at the farm. What a lovely sound. Sets the day up nicely.
We're in the farm truck with Chris Skinner, and it's our Christmas Eve edition, and you're very welcome. Thanks for coming along for the ride, and we are on a ride at the moment because we're in the truck and we're about half a mile, towards a mile away from High Ash Farm, going through a neighbouring village, heading out in towards the countryside. And Chris, you're taking us abroad.
Yes, Matthew, your face just lit up because we just passed the railway public house, and you thought you were going for a pint with me, but we're not. We're going on a mistletoe hunt, and we're just driven past Each, which is East Anglian Children's Hospice, and we just left Poor England, and we're almost on the boundary of Framingham Piggott. So we're driving down Piggott Lane, and I've brought you down here for a very special reason. Little fields on our left, which all used to be market gardens supplying Norwich fruit market here. All of these were market gardens left down right hand side of us. Very famous area, and we're already coming into what I want to show you. This is an amazing sight. It's a Christmas special, so it'd have to be holly, ivy, or in this case mistletoe. And I'm just going to stop. The village sign for Framingham Piggott is just in front of us. There's a little gateway here, and I'm just going to pull the truck up. And we almost don't need to get out of the truck, Matthew. But
I mean, there are trees here next to this road that are very mature trees. They're clad with ivy, but they've got some other clothing as well. You look right up into the canopy, and they are festooned with mistletoe.
They are. Handbrake on, engine off, and I'm going to make you get out. Although it's a breezy, gusty morning, this is worth a closer look.
Well, mistletoe on Christmas Eve, it does make absolute sense, doesn't it? And I've been down this lane before, actually, in the past, and this must be the best display of mistletoe that you would find anywhere. We're parked up next to the lane here, near Poor England, just south of Norwich, and we've got traffic coming past, but right in front of us, one of the finest examples of these mistletoe trees you'll see.
Yes, I think so. Certainly in the county of Norfolk, it's most at home, Matthew, down in the southwest, where it's very mild. You've got the influence of the Atlantic Ocean, anywhere around the Bristol Channel, Herefordshire, and that's also the area where most of its host trees grow, which are apple trees. But it's nowhere near as common as it used to be, because the old mature apple trees are quite large, 15, 20 feet high, and they've nearly all been replaced with modern bush varieties of apples, seeded on a dwarf rootstock, and then so it's much less common. But something's happened here. There were market gardens all around us here where we're standing, and they all had lots of apple trees, and that was one of the crops of apples that they were produced, and they were sold during the winter months. So the apples, a top kind of host for mistletoe, which is what we're looking at, and poplar trees, and certainly number two. So in northern France, where you get the big avenues of poplars for windbreaks, Lombardy poplar even, that's their second favourite host tree. So there's one poplar tree in front of us, and I reckon there's close to 50 clumps of mistletoe on that tree.
Some of them are like perfect spheres, aren't they?
Yes.
And they are very visible at this time of the year because the tree is completely leafless, and that's really the only sign of life on this tree is the mistletoe.
Yes, that's the surprising thing about mistletoe. It's green at this time of the year, and that's why it attracted so much folklore, because if you, from an ancient culture, you kind of wanted things that stayed live over the winter. It's kind of defying death, if you like. So it got heavily involved in early religions, which High Ash Farm is famous for. We've got a Romano-Celtic temple at the farm and lots of Celtic settlement. And the Celts had many druids there, and druids worshipped mistletoe. It was all part of their culture. The head druid was only allowed to cut mistletoe with a golden sickle. If you cut it with an iron sickle or mistletoe touched the ground, it would lose its magical powers. It was used in healing as well, all sorts of diseases, infertility and things like that were all meant to be cured with mistletoe. So a lot of history to it.
What is mistletoe, though?
Right, it's interesting because it's a much later addition to our planet, because it's a semi-parasite, not a true parasite.
Although being warned off, by the way. There's a bird warning us off.
Oh, I think it might be a mistle thrush. I did hear something.
Chattering away.
Yes, it was an alarm call. You can just hear it in the back. There it is. It is a mistle thrush. It's just flown through from one tree to another. And another one flying. There's 3 of them over the top of us.
It makes absolute sense, doesn't it? Mistle thrush, mistletoe.
Yes, and so it was a mistletoe thrush originally, and it's been abbreviated to mistle thrush. But back to your question, what is mistletoe? It's a semi-parasite. That means it just doesn't rely entirely on its host for its nutrition, but it has to have a host. So a lot of people will argue that it is in fact a parasite, but it's a bit unusual because it's got green leaves, so it can photosynthesize energy from the sun, and that provides some of its nutrition. The rest comes from its host, which can be ash trees, can be mainly apple, hawthorn, I've seen it growing on, and rarely and infrequently it's on oak, but poplar and apple are certainly the most common. And the other one it seems to like, occasionally on hawthorn, occasionally on hazel, and very rarely as well on 1 or 2 other species of trees as well. Field maple would be one. It seems to like that sort of richer sap. But it forms these spheres up in the tree, and normally in the summer months you don't see it because the tree, as you mentioned, is in full leaf. So mistle thrushes will eat the berries, and we just saw them. Oh, there they are. They're flying right over the top of us. That's Britain's largest native thrush, the mistle thrush. And so what they do, they eat the berries, and the berries have a glue in them. It's a really long, sticky glue, so the scientific name of mistletoe is Viscum alba, literally white, sticky berry. That's what it means in translation. So the viscous bit sticks to the bird's beaks, and the only way mistletoe can really get around the countryside and find a new host tree is for the mistletoe berry to be eaten by a thrush. It can be redwing. Oh, the wind's really blowing over the top of us.
That's not a jet aircraft. That
No.
is the wind coming through these poplars and other trees.
Yes. So blackbirds will eat them, song thrushes will eat them, mistle thrushes obviously eat them, and fieldfares. They're the 5 main birds that will distribute the berries. But the birds' beaks get glued up with all the gelatinous part of the berry. There's either 1 seed or 2 seeds in each little silver white berry that has this glue inside it. They're about 1 centimetre across, just under ½ an inch across in diameter, perfectly round, perfectly white, but not all the bunches of mistletoe above us have berries on. Some are completely bare, and that's male mistletoe. So it's rather like holly. You can have a male holly tree with no berries on whatsoever, but the male holly tree produces pollen, and nearby you can have a female holly tree that also comes into flower at the same time, and then the little flowers get pollinated by the pollen from the male one, and the same happens with mistletoe. So you need both male and female to get a good crop of berries.
Some plants swap over, don't they? But these don't?
No, ash tree is one that will swap sexes, and mistletoe doesn't. But I have seen half a clump of mistletoe with berries on it, and half without berries on it. So it does get a little bit confusing sometimes. And the reason for that is that 2 berries can be wiped off on whatever bird's beak. It just wipe them off to get rid of all this sticky, glutinous substance on their beaks. And you can have a male and female mistletoe seed putting out these little roots into the host tree. They're called houstoria, or horstoria, some people pronounce it as, and it's almost like a little root that goes into the bark, but it won't really thrive on the old trunk wood. So when we look up the tree, there's very few, if any, on the trunk. They prefer the fresh growth towards the end of the branches, and you can always age mistletoe. So what I'm going to do is to take you back to High Ash Farm. I have an orchard there, and I've got mistletoe growing. Instead of 40, 50 feet up, I wondered whether to bring a ladder this morning and put you up in close contact with the mistletoe.
Not in this wind.
There's always an excuse, isn't there, with any danger. But anyway, we'll see if we can find some at ground level and see if we can get a picture of us actually looking at the mistletoe at the farm, and I'll tell you a few more of its secrets.
These ones behind you, actually, they're magnificent as well.
Yes, look at that.
Come to Framingham Pigott if you want to see such a wonderful, especially at this time of the year, display of, and there's many more trees that around the corner here. There's
yes,
more,
there is. It carries on, but we're looking at over 100 clumps, and the clumps are about as large as mistletoe will get. And in a wind like this, because deciduous trees have lost their leaves for a good reason, when you get the winter gales, you can snap the branches off. But these branches here, the one tree closest to us, are absolutely weighed down with a huge canopy of mistletoe. Fantastic plant, full of history, and I'll explain a bit more when we get back to the farm.
Well, we've arrived at Chris's orchard to take our seatbelts off, but before we pop in there, Chris, as always, lots of correspondence, and I think this Christmas Eve edition, I think we ought to look at some people's questions here, because it's lovely to see. Someone who listens in Norfolk at Aylmerton, Bob Selby. Hello, Bob. Recently, I've witnessed a few events that I wouldn't expect. Today, I saw a buzzard land on a branch, and a grey squirrel kept approaching him, getting inches away. The buzzard just stared. Earlier, I'd seen a magpie land on the back of a perched buzzard. The buzzard didn't move. I've got videos of a fox sharing food with a hedgehog, and again a fox sharing food with a badger. So how do the animals that are considered prey for the top predators know when they can approach and when they're not going to become the next dinner?
That's a really lovely question and a very interesting one. And there's 2 completely separate aspects to that question. The first one is birds of similar ilk. They say birds of a feather flock together, but birds like buzzards and carrion crows and magpies are all sort of predators after the same food. And so birds like magpies and carrion crows will certainly try and attack or mob a buzzard to get it out of its territory, because they're competing for food on the ground. Maybe there's a dead rabbit there which the buzzard's feeding on. So what they're trying to do is to get it to shift out of their territory, and they get as close as they can. And often if the buzzard has had a good feed, it's a very lazy bird and it won't bother to fly out of the way, because it kind of knows the magpie is of no threat, no consequence to it at all, so it's not threatened by it. So that's quite a common occurrence, and often I'll see large birds of prey here at the farm, and there's an entourage of magpies and jackdaws in particular, occasional carrion crows and rooks will actually be after it, mobbing it, a whole gang of them, and so just trying to chase it out of their territory, because it's obviously big competition. But they seem, when they get really cross, they seem to lose all sense of fear about being eaten. And the second aspect, when you see a fox and hedgehog feeding, usually it's a feeding site where somebody's putting out food for them, and there's generally plenty of food, so there's no competition. So the fox, although it probably top trump the hedgehog if it wanted to, and give it a very bad time, won't actually bother because there's ample food in the territory. It's when there's a food shortage things start to get very aggressive, and also at certain times of the year certain animals will turn territorial and they won't tolerate other predators in their patch, so to speak. So it's kind of a two answered. I'm not trying to avoid the question, but there's two answers to that, and it is intensely interesting. And the same would happen with a fox and a badger being allowed to sort of feed together. I've seen that several times, and it just means there's ample food for both of them, so they haven't got to resort to violence, which can end up with one or other of them coming off worse.
We've got Christmas greetings coming in from Robert Bright, who's lived an awful lot in Suffolk, but has family links with North Norfolk as well. He says, my late mum was born on Brancaster Staithe, and he enjoys the podcast. Long may it continue, says Robert.
Thank you very much. It's always lovely to have emails like that.
Sheila Rolls says, I've heard a lot of tawny owl activity, calling, flapping, and what sounds like a tussle. There seem to be several birds involved. Could it have been territorial, or maybe searching for a mate at this time of the year?
Yes, this is exactly the time of the year. Almost, well, we're almost at the shortest day, which is tomorrow. And this is the time of the year tawny owls pair up. If they have paired up and there's a spare male or a spare female in that territory, they will certainly try and see it off, particularly two males. That doesn't really work in the world of tawny owls, and they make quite a kerfuffle actually, not the normal to-it-to-woos. It's various squeaks and screeches and lots of flapping going on, but the pair is already set up, and it probably has been since November, and so what's happening is the male is feeding the female. He's kind of giving her like the equivalent of a box of chocolates at the moment to kind of fatten her up, and she will get lots of extra fat just under the skin. It's called subcutaneous fat, and remember, she'll be laying eggs just in a week or two's time. They're really early nesters, tawny owls, and so he's doing a great job in the territory, so he's going to be seeing off any other males that might be offering an even better box of chocolates.
Tim Knight has emailed. He runs a community garden centre near Manchester, and he says, Chris, you fill me with optimism as I hear about how farming can actively increase biodiversity. But pardon me for being nosy, he says, but tell me, does that sort of farming pay compared with old school practices?
Well, you are being nosy, but I don't mind at all. I love questions like that. And the farm has completely changed. We have the farm orchard behind us, and in front of us are crops laid out, overwinter wild bird feed there. There's a field of teasels there, some grassland for hay on our left as we look over the farm towards the east. So it's completely changed from how it was when I was a child, where it was a mixed farm, cattle, livestock of all sorts, pigs, poultry here, big milk producers at the farm, as well as the crops as well. And that was how it was back then. And everything I was growing when I left college, the wheat, the barley, the sugar beet in particular, and the cattle as well, all became commodities. And that means they could be brought into this country really from anywhere in the world. I suppose if you go out from humanity and look back at what we do, I think we're the only species of a mammal in the world that brings its food in that isn't within walking distance of where you live. And all the other animals and birds, which are quite mobile, can fly around and find food. But generally, the mammals have their food source where they live, and we don't. So it's a really interesting question. So I started to realise that what I was producing was being grown anywhere in the world, particularly the cereal component and the sugar in third world, Afro-Caribbean countries, for example, and the price was really low or at or below the cost of production. So the Norfolk motto is do different, and I decided to enter a pretty large HLS, that's a higher level stewardship government sponsored scheme at the farm here. That finished in 2016 and the funding has dropped away like a stone. BPS, or the sort of area payment that farmers got, has also fading away hugely, and so a lot of the farm income comes from diversification, which is the horses at the farm here, and also for permissive walking, which is a really unusual crop, and that provides the income for the farm to enable it to be run in an environmentally friendly way. So I'm not a different farmer. Farming's changing and has done for centuries. It's changing particularly at the moment with huge machinery in huge fields still producing masses of food, which is ever so important, but also we're trying to do the impossible, and it's to look after our natural environment as well, and that's what I do. I haven't got a farm that's a zoo by any means. Everything that's here is wild really, and can roam about as it chooses, and the biodiversity has increased hugely, so have fields with absolutely flocks and flocks of birds on, and that's the delight, that's the payback for me. But I wouldn't say I'm ever going to be a wealthy farmer, so there we are. But you do occasionally see me on a bike, but we're in a truck this morning.
And finally, before we go out and about once again, Elise and Jill, thank you for your photograph you've sent of a spider. Big, fat close-up of a spider. Couldn't resist taking the photo when I found the huntsman taking a close look at the map and card of High Ash Farm. I have them both on display in my kitchen. And there we are, Chris. There's a photograph of High Ash Farm and the huntsman. Oh, yes. He's a ferocious-looking spider.
It looks as though the spider is the size of the field. It's actually on the brochure, and so you've got a kind of disproportionate view of a hugely wide, giant spider. It looks like 10 yards across.
It looks like one of those horror films.
Yes,
Monster.
it does. But what a brilliant picture. But I particularly love the wildflower picture under the spider with all the clovers and sainfoin there. Just wonderful. So thank you very much for all the correspondence we receive. We do read through it all. It's because of the volume, it's not always possible to answer all the questions and all the queries, but we have a jolly good go.
Well, moving into the new year, we'll be very happy to receive your emails, and the address is chris@countrysidepodcast.co.uk.
That should find me.
Here we are. Into the orchard, open the gate, and well, it's looking like a winter scene here, isn't it? The apples all disappeared.
Yes, the plum trees, we're just walking through the first part of the orchard. These are Victoria plums. The wind is still howling. This area was covered in giant cedar trees and Scots pine, and most of them got flattened on the 16th of October 1987. And the area we're now coming into is all varieties of soft fruit and fruit as well. So we've got Victoria plums on the south side of the orchard, then eating apples, things like Cox's orange pippin here in the centre row, and then good old Bramleys here right beside us.
Ah, and here's the star of our show today.
Yes, right down at head height.
With a bunch of, yes, this is very manageable for us, a bunch of mistletoe with a little pearl-like fruit.
Yes, this is it, Matthew, and this is the time of the year that you can actually seed mistletoe. Some of the berries aren't pearly white. You can see one slightly greenish there, it's not quite ready, and the white ones are just right for seeding, and it's a simple thing in the world. You choose a small, fairly fresh twig within, oh, here's one just down here. We walk up to this, just coming out the side of the tree, and I squeeze the berry like this, and this is the interesting bit. There's a single seed in that particular berry. You can see there's like a long strings of glue hanging out, which is part of the scientific name. And all you do, you polish a young piece of apple wood like that with your fingernail. Don't scratch the bark too much, just polish it. like it's a piece of cherry wood, and then you hang the seed on, pull the other part of the seed away, and you leave it just like that.
It looks like a teardrop just hanging.
Yes, it does, and it will pull itself against the twig, and you have to wait a year or more before you see any activity. And all over the apple trees here are tiny little mistletoe, self-seeded ones, some of them high up in the trees, some of them really low down, and they just germinate around about sort of next spring, but you won't see any fresh leaves. And each year mistletoe puts out a fresh pair of leaves, and you can age it very easily. The leathery greenish yellow leaves, you can actually age mistletoe. You go back from each pair of leaves to where it joins the tree. So this is 1 year, 2 years, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I'm going to give it 1 more year till it actually showed itself. So that's 10 years old, that clump, and it's about nearly 3 feet across.
So how old are some of those clumps on the trees that we saw at
I'd
Framingham
have thought
Piggott?
they're 25 years old, probably. That's about as big as they get. Spherical, huge clumps, and almost causing a wind problem for the trees. But nevertheless, I just love it. As I mentioned, it's a semi-parasite, not a complete parasite. Lots and lots of folklore attached to it, and it's probably one of the best known plants in our country, actually. So even young people know about it, and certainly kissing under the mistletoe comes right back from Druid times, and it's come into our culture today. People still hang it above their entrance door, hoping that actually, if you've got a clump of mistletoe, you can claim a kiss. But I'm not sure about that today with COVID going around anymore. But there we are.
It's not my only objection.
It's really interesting plant. So thank you for coming to the orchard and sharing some of the history of the plant, which really seems to defy death. So you can see the shiny white berries here right in front of us. There we are. I daren't go into the farmyard with all those girls there armed with a clump of it, so it's going to stay on the tree this year.
Christmas Eve mistletoe. Well, thank you for listening to another Countryside podcast with Chris Skinner. And just before we go, we've had great fun opening up your correspondence, but there's one last parcel, isn't there,
There
Chris?
is. I'm just opening it as we speak. It's really well done up. It's been through customs because the sender's name on the back is Tamsin Singleton, Dale Crescent, Mount Stewart, wait for it, Tasmania, Australia. And it's for you and I, Matthew. Just opening it up. Let's see what we've got.
They do parcels up well in Australia.
Yes, it's been through customs. Oh, wow. There's a beautiful card here, all done up nicely. Oh, we got some chocolates. And what else have we got here? Oh, you have spoilt us.
There's not some more kangaroo meat, is there?
I'm not sure. Oh, it is. It's from the Doghouse Bakery. .com Australia.
And that'll be for your terrible terrier.
I think so. He is so lucky. Fancy that, getting present through the post.
Dinner time for Rat.
And a card. Matthew and Chris, happy holidays. Hoping you manage some few minutes or something spare there. There we are. From Tamsin in Tasmania. Wow, thank you very much indeed.
Lovely to hear from the other side of the world.
Wow, what about that? That shows the power of podcasts. Amazing.